Hi.
I've thought about posting this for a while. I'm John Sullivan, a 53-year-old businessman, or at least I used to be one until my personal life imploded. The truth is, I need to write this out, to make sense of it all and maybe figure out where to go from here. I met April in college. She was ambitious, smart, and I thought, everything I'd ever wanted. We got married young and built a life together, supporting each other's dreams. She wanted to get into politics, and I was her biggest cheerleader. Over the years, I'd built a successful business while she climbed the political ladder, eventually becoming a congresswoman. It felt like we were a team, but now I see it differently. I was the foundation, and she used me as her stepping stone. Looking back, the cracks had been there for years. April's job became her identity, and I became a prop. Her disdain for me started subtly, little digs at how I wasn't intellectual enough for her political world, jokes about my boring business dinners. Intimacy disappeared, replaced by late nights at the office or campaign events. At first, I chalked it up to stress, but when her re-election campaign started, things got worse. She was always surrounded by staff, consultants, and donors. One guy stood out, Doug Simpson, her campaign advisor. I'd seen the way she laughed at his jokes, the private conversations that ended when I entered the room. My gut told me something was off, but I ignored it. After all, we'd been married 25 years. I told myself I was being paranoid. But one night, while she was working late, a text popped up on her tablet. She'd forgotten to log out of her account. It was from Doug, and it wasn't work-related. I won't share all the details, but let's just say it made my blood run cold. My hands were shaking, but I knew this wasn't something I could handle emotionally in the moment. Instead of confronting her, I decided to get proof. I hired a private investigator. The next few weeks were brutal. While April thought I was clueless, I was gathering evidence. Photos of her at hotels, dinner dates with not just Doug but other men, some political allies, some donors. The investigators even found whispers of her trading favors for endorsements and campaign contributions. The betrayal was worse than I ever imagined. I wanted to explode, but I realized something. I had spent 25 years building a life for us, and she had torn it apart without a second thought. She was out there smiling for cameras, while making me look like a fool. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not quietly, at least. And that's when I started planning her downfall. Once I had all the evidence, my anger transformed into something cold and calculating. I couldn't just walk away. I needed her to feel the weight of her actions. This wasn't about being petty or vindictive, it was about reclaiming my dignity. If April had reduced our marriage to nothing but a campaign prop, I was going to dismantle her perfect image. Our 25th wedding anniversary was coming up, and she wanted to throw a big party to showcase her happy family image. It was the perfect opportunity. Public events were her domain, and she always controlled the narrative. But this time, I was going to take the reins. First, I reached out to key people, her parents, our kids, mutual friends, even some of her political allies. I played the supportive husband, emphasizing how excited I was about the event and making sure everyone was coming. The guest list grew to include not just friends and family, but reporters and campaign donors. April was thrilled, thinking I was finally embracing her world. I smiled and nodded, letting her believe whatever she wanted. Behind the scenes, I worked with my lawyer to prepare the divorce papers. I also had the investigator compile the evidence into an airtight dossier. I wanted everything ready for what I had planned. The night before the party, I barely slept. I lay awake thinking about the years I had spent loving her, supporting her dreams, and raising our kids together. It felt surreal to know it was all coming to an end. But there was no turning back. The morning of the party, April was in full-on campaign mode, barking orders at the staff and perfecting her speech. I watched her from the kitchen, sipping my coffee and wondering how I'd ever been blind to her true nature. She barely looked at me, too preoccupied with her own image. "Are you ready for tonight?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Oh, I'm ready," I replied, hiding the bitterness in my voice. That evening, the house was packed. The living room was transformed into a high-end venue, complete with floral arrangements and a professional photographer. April glided through the crowd like a queen, shaking hands and posing for pictures. She introduced me to her colleagues like I was an accessory, a necessary part of the image but not someone who mattered. The anniversary cake was brought out, and the crowd gathered around. April tapped her glass, calling for attention. She gave a heartfelt speech about love, partnership, and our wonderful life together. It was dripping with insincerity, but the audience ate it up. When she finally handed me the microphone, I felt a strange calm. "Thank you, April," I began. "For 25 years, I believed in us. I believed in you. But tonight, I have to be honest, with myself and everyone here." The room went quiet. I pulled out a stack of papers, the dossier, and set them on the table next to the cake. This isn't just an anniversary. It's a memorial service, for a marriage that no longer exists. The crowd murmured, unsure of what I was saying. April's smile faltered, her eyes darting toward me. Before she could interrupt, I continued. "Tonight, we bury the lies. The betrayal. The image of a perfect family that you've worked so hard to maintain. April, for years, I stood by you. I supported your career, raised our children, and believed in the vows we made. But behind the scenes, you've been lying, to me, to our family, and to everyone in this room." Gasps filled the air as I reached into a box and pulled out our wedding certificate. This certificate used to mean something. It represented love, trust, and partnership. But now, it's nothing more than a piece of paper. I held it up for everyone to see, then lit it with a match. The flames danced as the certificate turned to ash. Someone screamed, and the photographer's camera flashed, capturing the moment. "This coffin," I said, gesturing toward the small box I'd set up earlier, "is where our marriage will rest." Inside were photos, keepsakes, and mementos from our 25 years together. I placed the ashes of the certificate inside, closed the lid, and nailed it shut. The crowd was frozen in shock. April stood there, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she were trying to find the words. But I wasn't done. "Doug Simpson," I called out, scanning the room. "I know you're here. You might want to step forward. This concerns you too." The room erupted in whispers. Doug, red-faced and visibly uncomfortable, tried to slip toward the door, but two of my friends blocked his path. I handed the divorce papers to April and a copy to Doug. "You've both been served," I announced. "The details of your affair, and April's other arrangements, are in that folder. Feel free to deny it, but the evidence speaks for itself." April collapsed into a chair, her head in her hands. Doug stood frozen, his career and reputation unraveling before his eyes. Cameras captured everything, the tears, the drama, and the end of the perfect couple. I walked out of that house feeling lighter than I had in years. For once, the narrative was mine. The aftermath of that night was chaos, just as I expected. By the time I drove away, reporters were already swarming outside the house, eager to turn the spectacle into tomorrow's headline. I didn't care. I left April there to face the fallout herself. She had built her world on lies, and now it was crumbling in front of everyone. I checked into a hotel that night. The quiet felt strange after the noise and drama, but it was exactly what I needed. I didn't even bother turning on the TV to see the news coverage. I knew it would be bad for her, and that was enough. Instead, I sat on the balcony with a drink, staring at the city lights and wondering what my life would look like from here. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. Friends, family, even business associates reached out, some to show support, others just fishing for gossip. I ignored most of them. What surprised me were the messages from April's parents. They wanted to talk, claiming they had no idea what she had been up to. I doubted that, but I agreed to meet them later that week. Then there were the kids. Our daughter Megan was in college, and our son Daniel was a senior in high school. Both of them were old enough to understand what was going on, but that didn't make it any easier. Megan called me, furious. "Dad, what the hell was that?" she demanded. "Why would you humiliate Mom like that? Couldn't you just deal with this privately?" I took a deep breath. "Megan, I know this is hard to understand, but your mom's actions went beyond just hurting me. She betrayed our entire family. I needed the truth to come out. But in front of everyone? At a party." Her voice cracked, and I felt a pang of guilt. "Do you know how embarrassing this is for us? My friends are texting me non-stop." "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this," I said honestly. "But your mom's choices forced my hand." Daniel, on the other hand, was eerily silent. He didn't call or text, which worried me. I left him a message, asking if we could talk, but he didn't respond. I figured he needed time to process everything. Meanwhile, the media storm was relentless. April's perfect image was shattered, and the story about her affairs, especially the allegations of trading favors for campaign contributions, spread like wildfire. Her political career was now on life support. Every time I walked past a newsstand, I saw her name in bold headlines. Scandal rocks Congresswoman April Sullivan's re-election campaign. Affairs and allegations. The downfall of a rising star. Doug Simpson wasn't faring much better. He resigned from the campaign 2 days after the party, citing personal reasons. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd been so smug, acting like he was untouchable, and now he was just as disgraced as April. What I didn't expect was for April to call me. I was sitting in my hotel room when my phone buzzed. Seeing her name on the screen made my stomach turn, but curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "What do you want, April?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. "John, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky. "Not about the divorce, about everything else. There's more you don't know." "I think I know enough," I snapped. "Unless you're calling to apologize, I don't want to hear it." "Please," she begged. "You owe me this much." I laughed bitterly. "I don't owe you anything. But fine, I'll listen. Go ahead." She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then she said something I didn't expect. "It wasn't just me, John. Some of the things I did. I was blackmailed into them." My grip on the phone tightened. "What are you talking about?" She took a shaky breath. "There's a senator, James Ralston. He's powerful, and he has dirt on everyone. He had photos, things from years ago, and he used them to make me cooperate." I felt a wave of anger, but it wasn't entirely aimed at her. "You're telling me you traded favors because you were blackmailed? Is that supposed to make this better?" "I didn't have a choice," she cried. "If those photos got out, my career would have been over before it even started. I was trying to protect everything we built." "Everything you built," I corrected. "Don't drag me into this mess." There was a long silence before she spoke again. "I know I've ruined everything. I just needed you to know the full story." "Why now, April? Why not come to me when this started?" "I didn't think you'd understand," she admitted. And I was scared. Her words hung in the air. I wanted to feel sorry for her, but it was hard to find sympathy for someone who had lied to my face for years. "I'll let my lawyer know about this," I said finally. "If what you're saying is true, it could impact the divorce proceedings." "John, please," she started, but I hung up before she could finish. The revelation about the blackmail added another layer of complexity to the situation. As much as I despised April, I couldn't ignore the possibility that she was also a victim in some of this. But that didn't absolve her of her choices. She could have told me. She could have trusted me to help her. Instead, she threw me under the bus to protect her career. I spent the rest of the day sitting by the hotel window, staring at the city below. Part of me wanted to burn her entire world to the ground, but another part of me just wanted to move on. A week after the party, the dust hadn't settled, not even close. April's scandal was all anyone could talk about, and I had become an unwilling participant in the media circus. I was referred to as the betrayed husband, and while I didn't care about public sympathy, the constant phone calls from reporters were exhausting. I finally managed to meet with Megan and Daniel to explain things face to face. We met at a diner near Megan's campus. Daniel showed up late, his hood pulled low over his face. Megan was already seated, arms crossed, her expression a mix of anger and confusion. I could tell this wasn't going to be easy. "Thanks for coming," I said as I sat down. Megan wasted no time. "Dad, what were you thinking? Why didn't you just talk to Mom instead of airing everything out like that?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Megan, I did try to talk to her, many times. But she wasn't honest with me. I'm sorry if this hurt you, but you needed to know the truth." Daniel stared at the table, avoiding eye contact. "So what now?" he mumbled. "Are you and Mom just done?" I nodded. "We are. I filed for divorce." Megan shook her head, clearly frustrated. "Great. So now we're the kids of the couple who had the most public breakup in town. Do you know how embarrassing this is for us?" "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "But I had to take a stand. Your mom didn't just betray me, she betrayed our family." Daniel finally looked up, his eyes filled with hurt. Did she really cheat? With that guy Doug?" "Yes," I admitted. "And others." Daniel's face fell, and he sank back into his seat. Megan looked furious. Why are you telling us this? We're your kids, not your therapists. I felt a pang of guilt. You're right. I don't mean to burden you with this. But you deserve to know why things are changing. After an awkward silence, the waitress came by to take our orders. Megan and Daniel barely touched their food, and when the meal was over, they left quickly. Megan said she needed time to process, and Daniel muttered something about going back to school. As I watched them leave, I realized just how much damage April's actions had caused, not just to our marriage, but to our family as a whole. That evening, I got a call from April. I debated ignoring it, but decided to pick up. They hate me, she said the moment I answered. Her voice was raw, almost unrecognizable. Megan won't return my calls, and Daniel walked out on me this morning. They're hurt, I said flatly. What did you expect? You have to help me fix this, John, she pleaded. They need their mother. I let out a bitter laugh. Now you want to act like a mom? April, you made your choices. You didn't think about the kids when you were sneaking around with Doug. Don't you dare, she snapped. I've always been there for them. Physically, maybe. Emotionally? Not so much, I shot back. The line went silent for a moment. I know I messed up, she admitted, her voice breaking. But I don't want to lose my kids. That's up to you, April. They'll need time. Don't expect them to forgive you overnight. Meanwhile, April's career continued to nosedive. The blackmail revelation she'd shared with me turned out to be true. Senator Ralston had dirt on several politicians, April included. But instead of coming forward with it, April had played along, thinking she could outmaneuver him. That gamble had cost her everything. She was forced to withdraw from the re-election race, and her political allies abandoned her one by one. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction watching her fall, but the truth is, it just made me feel empty. We'd built a life together, and now it was all ashes. Even though she'd betrayed me, it was hard to watch her lose everything. 2 weeks after the party, I finally heard from Daniel. He called late one night, his voice quiet and hesitant. Hey, Dad. Hey, buddy. How are you? I don't know, he said. Everything feels messed up. I know, I replied. I'm sorry you've been caught in the middle of this. There was a long pause before he spoke again. I don't think I can forgive Mom. Not yet. You don't have to, I said gently. Take your time. No one's rushing you. He sighed. Do you think she's sorry? I thought about it for a moment. I think she's sorry for the consequences, but I don't know if she fully understands the damage she's done. Daniel didn't respond, but I could hear the weight of his emotions in his silence. Before he hung up, he said something that broke my heart. I wish things could go back to the way they were. Me too, son, I whispered. Me too. In the weeks following the party, I threw myself into planning my future. The marriage was over, the house was just a shell of bad memories, and my business felt more like a burden than an achievement. I needed a fresh start. Divorce proceedings were already underway, and while my lawyer assured me the evidence we had would give me the upper hand, I wasn't interested in dragging this out any longer than necessary. I just wanted to be free. The public fallout from April's scandal was relentless. Every time I turned on the TV or scrolled through social media, there was some new angle. Former supporters came forward with thinly veiled criticisms, calling her untrustworthy and a disappointment. Doug Simpson tried to defend her in a public statement, but it only made things worse. The rumor mill was spinning out of control, and April's name was becoming a punchline. I stayed quiet. I didn't give interviews or post statements online. The party had been my statement, and I saw no need to add to the noise. But behind the scenes, I was making moves. One of my first priorities was selling the house. It was too big, too empty, and too tied to memories I didn't want. I found a real estate agent who specialized in high-profile properties and told her I wanted it sold as quickly as possible. She hesitated at first, mentioning how the scandal might affect the sale, but I didn't care about getting top dollar. I just wanted to move on. Packing up the house was a surreal experience. Every item I boxed up felt like a reminder of what we'd lost: family vacations, birthday parties, holidays. I came across our wedding album and almost laughed at how naive I looked in those photos, smiling like I'd won the lottery. I tossed it into a donation pile without a second thought. What hit me the hardest was packing up the kids' rooms. Even though they were older now, their childhood things were still there: stuffed animals, trophies, posters. It reminded me of a time when we were still a family, before everything fell apart. I decided to pack those boxes carefully, labeling them for Megan and Daniel. They deserved to have those memories, even if the foundation they were built on was gone. In the middle of all this, April showed up at the house unannounced. She looked like a shadow of her former self, tired, disheveled, and weighed down by the scandal. "I thought we agreed you'd call before coming over," I said, not bothering to hide my annoyance. I needed to see the house," she said quietly. "Is that a problem?" I sighed and stepped aside to let her in. She wandered through the rooms, her eyes lingering on the bare walls and half-packed boxes. "You're really selling it?" she asked. "I am," I said firmly. "There's nothing for me here anymore." She nodded, running her hand along the edge of the dining table. "This house was supposed to be our dream," she said, more to herself than to me. "I can't believe it's ending like this." "That's what happens when you destroy everything you claim to care about," I replied coldly. She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she sat down at the table, burying her face in her hands. "John, I know you'll never forgive me, but I need to ask you something, for the kids' sake." I crossed my arms, waiting for her to continue. "Can we at least try to be civil? They're already hurting enough. They don't need us making it worse." Her words struck a nerve. As much as I despised her, she was right about one thing: Megan and Daniel didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. "I'll do my part," I said. "But don't expect me to play nice when you've done nothing to earn it." April nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered before leaving. I didn't watch her go. That night, I sat in my hotel room, thinking about her words. Civil, could I really be civil with someone who had shattered my life? Maybe for the kids, I told myself. They were the only reason I'd even consider it. But I also realized that being civil didn't mean being forgiving. It didn't mean pretending everything was okay. It meant drawing boundaries and sticking to them. And as I started making plans for the future, I promised myself one thing: I would rebuild my life on my terms. April had taken enough from me. It was time to take back control. By the time the house sold, I had already lined up my next steps. The kids were still adjusting, Megan barely returned my calls, and Daniel oscillated between anger and sadness. But I knew I couldn't let their feelings, or my own guilt, keep me from moving forward. I'd spent years as April's support system, and now I had to figure out who I was without her. I found a smaller place on the outskirts of the city, nothing fancy, but cozy enough to feel like home. It had a big, open backyard and a small workshop that I could use for projects. It wasn't the sprawling house we'd lived in as a family, but it felt like a fresh start. I pictured Daniel and Megan visiting, imagined hosting barbecues or just sitting outside with a book, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Moving in was both exhausting and therapeutic. I didn't bring much from the old house, just a few pieces of furniture, my clothes, and some personal items. Everything else was either sold, donated, or left behind. I wanted a clean slate, and cluttering it with reminders of the past wasn't an option. One night, as I unpacked, Daniel showed up unannounced. It was the first time I'd seen him since our awkward diner meeting. "Hey," he said, standing in the doorway, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. "Hey kid," I said, surprised but glad to see him. "Come on in." He wandered around the house, taking it all in. "This is different," he said finally. "But it's nice. Thanks." "It's a work in progress," I replied. He sat down at the kitchen table, and I joined him. For a few minutes, we just sat there in silence. Then he said, "I don't know how to talk to Mom anymore." I leaned back, giving him space to speak. "What do you mean?" "She keeps calling, acting like everything's fine, like nothing happened. But it's not fine. I can't even look at her without thinking about," he trailed off, his face tightening. I nodded. "It's okay to feel that way. What she did hurt all of us, not just me. But she's still my mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I hate her for what she did, but I also hate feeling like I'm supposed to pick sides." "You don't have to pick sides," I said gently. "Your relationship with her is yours to figure out. Take the time you need." Daniel looked down at the table, his shoulders slumping. "It just sucks." "Yeah, it does," I admitted. "But we'll get through it." For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a small smile on his face. "Thanks, Dad." We spent the rest of the evening unpacking boxes and talking about everything except April. When he left, I felt a sense of relief, like maybe we'd taken a small step toward healing. While I was settling into my new life, April was still trying to salvage hers. She called me one evening, sounding frantic. "John, I need your help," she said without preamble. "Help with what?" I asked, already regretting answering. "My campaign team is gone, the press won't leave me alone, and I don't know how to fix this," she said, her voice cracking. "That's not my problem, April," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "You made this mess. You figure it out. Don't you care about what happens to me?" she snapped. "Not anymore," I said bluntly. "You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences. Maybe you should have thought about that before lying to everyone who ever cared about you." She didn't have a response to that. I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and satisfaction. It wasn't my job to save her, not anymore. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself for the first time in years. I started working out again, reconnecting with old friends, and even picking up a few hobbies I'd abandoned during the marriage. I felt lighter, freer. The weight of April's betrayal was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating as before. One afternoon, I got a call from Megan. She wanted to come see the new place. When she arrived, she seemed nervous, like she wasn't sure how to act around me. But as we sat on the back porch, drinking iced tea and catching up, the tension began to fade. "I'm sorry for how I reacted," she said suddenly. "I was just so mad. At you, at Mom, at everything." "I get it," I said. "This hasn't been easy for any of us." She looked out at the yard, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think she regrets it? Losing all of this?" I considered the question carefully. "I think she regrets getting caught. I don't know if she truly understands what she's lost." Megan nodded, her face hardening. "She doesn't deserve you." I didn't respond, but hearing her say that felt like validation. For so long, I'd wondered if I was overreacting, if I'd done the right thing by exposing April so publicly. But now I knew, I'd had no choice. It wasn't just about me, it was about protecting my family from her lies. For the first time in months, I felt like I was on the right path. My life wasn't perfect, and the scars from April's betrayal would always be there. But I was moving forward, one step at a time. And for the first time in years, I was doing it for me. While I was focused on rebuilding, April's scandal kept growing, taking on a life of its own. The revelations about her blackmail by Senator James Ralston hit the news after one of her former staffers leaked additional details. Headlines painted her as both a victim and a manipulator, a complex story that left no room for redemption. I tried not to get dragged into the media frenzy, but curiosity got the better of me when Daniel mentioned something he'd seen online. "Dad, did you know Mom's tied up in some huge political thing? Like, the FBI is involved." "What are you talking about?" I asked, setting down my coffee. He showed me an article on his phone. It detailed an ongoing investigation into Ralston, who was accused of running a network of coercion and corruption. April's name was buried deep in the report, but it was there, Congresswoman implicated in blackmail scheme, alleged to have traded favors under pressure. Part of me felt vindicated, she had brought this on herself. But another part of me worried. If she was dragged deeper into the investigation, it could affect our kids, or worse, me. The media had already hounded us after the anniversary fiasco. What would happen if this blew up further? Later that week, April called me again. I almost didn't answer, but something told me this wasn't just another plea for sympathy. "John, you've seen the news, haven't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I have," I said flatly. "I'm being subpoenaed," she confessed. "The FBI wants me to testify against Ralston." "Good," I said without hesitation. "If he did what they're saying, he deserves to go down." "But you don't understand," she said, panic rising in her voice. "If I testify, everything comes out, everything. The deals I made, the lies, the affairs. It'll destroy what little I have left." "That's not my concern," I replied coldly. "You made those choices, April. Now you have to face the consequences." She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know how I got here," she said quietly. "I thought I was doing what I had to, building a career, protecting our family. And now it's all gone." "You got here by putting ambition above everything else," I said. "Including your family." "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "But I need to know, do you hate me?" I paused, caught off guard by the question. Did I hate her? The anger I felt when I discovered her betrayal had burned hot and bright, but now it was more like embers. I didn't hate her, I pitied her. No, April, I said finally. I don't hate you. But I don't respect you either. The subpoena forced April into a corner. She couldn't dodge it without risking jail time, so she agreed to cooperate with the investigation. The media frenzy reignited as reporters speculated about what she might reveal. Meanwhile, Ralston doubled down, calling the allegations against him a smear campaign. It was all theater, but it had real consequences for everyone involved. Megan and Daniel tried to distance themselves from the drama, but it wasn't easy. Megan stopped taking April's calls entirely, and Daniel became even more withdrawn. One evening, he sat on the couch, flipping through channels without really watching anything. "You okay, bud?" I asked, sitting down beside him. He shrugged. "I don't know. It feels like everything's falling apart. It's a lot to deal with," I said. "But you're not alone in this. We'll get through it." He turned to me, his eyes full of uncertainty. "Do you think Mom's going to jail?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever happens, we'll deal with it together." As the weeks passed, April's testimony became the centerpiece of the investigation. She handed over emails, recordings, and other evidence that implicated Ralston and several others in his circle. It was a damning case, and by the time the hearings started, her political career was completely over. April called me one last time before her testimony went public. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You tell the truth," I said simply. "It's the only thing you have left." She didn't reply, but I heard her take a deep breath before hanging up. When the testimony aired, I watched it with a mix of emotions. April was calm and composed, answering the questions with precision. She admitted to being coerced, detailed the blackmail, and laid out the deals she'd made. It was a damning account, but it also painted her as a pawn in a much larger game. The media reaction was mixed. Some saw her as brave for coming forward, while others labeled her complicit. For me, it was just another chapter in a story I wanted to close. But the testimony had an unexpected effect. Megan reached out to April for the first time in months. "I still don't forgive her," Megan told me. "But I think she's finally trying to make things right." By the end of the hearings, Ralston was indicted, and April was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She moved out of the city to escape the scrutiny, and I heard through mutual friends that she was trying to reconnect with Megan and Daniel. For me, her testimony marked the end of an era. Watching her confess to the lies and deceit felt like closure, not just for our marriage, but for everything I'd carried since the day I found out about her betrayal. With April's testimony behind us, the media frenzy finally started to die down. The headlines shifted to other scandals, other stories. April disappeared from public view, retreating to a quiet life in a small town far from the city. I heard bits and pieces about her from Daniel and Megan, how she was trying to rebuild her relationship with them, how she'd taken up gardening of all things. It was strange to imagine her digging in the dirt after years of shaking hands with political elites. For me, life was moving forward. The house had sold, and I was settling into my new place. Megan visited occasionally, but Daniel was there more often. He seemed to find comfort in the simplicity of my new home, the quiet yard, the small workshop where I tinkered with old furniture, the lack of cameras or reporters lurking around the corner. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel helped me stain a wooden table I'd been working on. The air smelled of sawdust and varnish, and for the first time in what felt like forever, things felt normal. "You ever think about dating again?" Daniel asked suddenly, his tone casual but curious. I glanced at him, surprised. "Not really. I'm not sure I'm ready for that." He nodded, running a cloth over the table. "I just think you deserve to be happy, you know? Mom, she didn't appreciate you. Maybe someone else will." His words stayed with me long after he left that evening. I hadn't thought much about dating, partly because I was still healing, but also because I wasn't sure how to let someone new into my life. Trust felt like a fragile thing, something I wasn't ready to hand over again. A few weeks later, Megan stopped by for lunch. She seemed lighter, more at ease than I'd seen her in months. Over sandwiches on the back porch, she brought up April. "Mom wants me to visit her," she said, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. "She's been different lately. Calmer. I think she's trying." "That's good," I said carefully. "Have you decided if you'll go?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm still angry, but I guess part of me misses her." I nodded, understanding. "Take your time. She'll have to earn your trust back." Megan looked at me, her eyes searching mine. Have you forgiven her? It was a question I hadn't fully answered for myself. I've let go of the anger, I said slowly. But forgiveness? I don't know if I'll ever get there. Megan seemed to accept that, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics, her classes, her plans for the summer. But her question lingered in my mind long after she left. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a beer in hand, I thought about what Daniel and Megan had said. About happiness. About forgiveness. About moving on. I realized I'd spent so much time focused on what I'd lost that I hadn't considered what I could gain. The next morning, I went for a long hike, something I hadn't done in years. The fresh air, the quiet, the rhythm of my steps, all of it felt cleansing. As I reached the top of the trail, looking out over the rolling hills, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time since the night of the anniversary party, I wasn't thinking about April. I wasn't thinking about betrayal or anger or loss. I was thinking about the future. The peace I felt on that hike stayed with me in the days that followed. It wasn't like everything was suddenly fixed. There were still moments when anger bubbled up, or when I'd catch myself replaying old arguments in my head. But those moments were fewer and farther between, and for the first time, I felt like I had the space to breathe. Daniel came by the following weekend with an unexpected question. Dad, do you want to go fishing? I blinked at him, surprised. Fishing? You've never been interested in fishing. Yeah, well, he said, scratching the back of his neck. I figured it's something we could do together. Get out of the house, clear our heads. I didn't need much convincing. Early the next Saturday, we loaded up the truck with gear we borrowed from a friend and headed to a nearby lake. It was one of those crisp mornings where the air smelled like pine and the water mirrored the sky perfectly. We didn't talk much as we cast our lines, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists when you're with someone who understands you. After a while, Daniel broke the quiet. I talked to Mom yesterday. I kept my eyes on the water. How'd that go? Better than I expected, he admitted. She apologized again. Said she knew she had a lot to make up for. And how do you feel about that? I asked. He shrugged. I don't know. Part of me wants to forgive her, but another part can't forget what she did. It's complicated. I nodded, reeling in my line. That's okay. It doesn't have to be simple. We sat there for a while longer, the only sounds coming from the occasional splash of a fish or the rustle of the wind through the trees. It felt good to just be there with him, away from everything. That night, I got a call from Megan. I decided to visit Mom, she said. Just for a weekend. How do you feel about that? I asked. Nervous, she admitted. But I think it's the right thing to do. I need to see for myself if she's really changed. I encouraged her, telling her to trust her instincts. You're strong, Megan. Whatever happens, you'll handle it. Thanks, Dad, she said softly. And thanks for always being there. As my relationship with the kids stabilized, I started thinking more about what I wanted my own life to look like. The house was feeling more like home, but it was still quiet, too quiet sometimes. One evening, as I cleaned up after dinner, I thought about Daniel's question, would I ever date again? The idea seemed daunting, but it also intrigued me. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to share a laugh with, to remind me that there was life beyond the wreckage of my marriage. So, with some hesitation, I downloaded a dating app. It felt strange, putting myself out there after so many years, but I figured it couldn't hurt to try. The first few matches were interesting, to say the least. There was the woman who sent me 20 questions before we'd even said hello, and the one who clearly only wanted a free dinner. But then there was Lisa, a kind, down-to-earth woman who worked as a school counselor. We messaged back and forth for a couple of weeks before deciding to meet for coffee. When I arrived at the cafe, I was nervous, but Lisa's warm smile immediately put me at ease. We talked for hours about everything, our jobs, our families, the books we loved. It felt easy, natural. For the first time in a long time, I found myself laughing without reservation. As we said goodbye, she touched my arm and said, I had a really great time, John. Me too, I said, and I meant it. That night, as I sat on the porch, I thought about how far I'd come. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. I wasn't defined by April's betrayal or the chaos that followed. I was moving forward, one small step at a time. And for the first time, I felt hopeful about what the future might bring. After my first meeting with Lisa, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: optimism. We started seeing each other casually, nothing too serious. It was refreshing to spend time with someone who wasn't tangled in my past. Lisa didn't ask about April or the scandal unless I brought it up, and even then, she listened without judgment. It was a reprieve, a glimpse of what my life could look like moving forward. But the past doesn't let go that easily. One afternoon, while I was out running errands, I got a call from Megan. "Dad, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice tense. "Mom showed up on campus." "What?" I stopped in my tracks, gripping the phone tightly. "Why?" "She said she wanted to talk, to explain herself," Megan said. "She was waiting outside my dorm like some kind of stalker." "What did you do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I told her we could grab coffee. I didn't want to cause a scene." "And?" I pressed. Megan hesitated. She was different. Apologetic, like, actually apologetic. She talked about the mistakes she made, how she let her ambition ruin everything. She even admitted she doesn't know if she'll ever fully fix things with me or Daniel. I sighed, unsure how to respond. "How did you feel about it?" "I don't know," she admitted. Part of me wanted to scream at her, but another part just felt sad. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "It's okay to feel that way. Healing isn't linear, Megan. You'll figure it out." The encounter with Megan stirred something in me. April's attempts at redemption, however genuine, felt like too little, too late. But it also made me realize I was still holding onto pieces of the past: grudges, bitterness, unresolved anger. I needed to confront it, if only to let it go. That evening, I found myself driving toward April's new town. I didn't have a plan or even a clear idea of what I wanted to say, but I knew I couldn't keep carrying the weight of our history. When I arrived, she looked surprised to see me. "John," she said, standing in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk," I said simply. She stepped aside, letting me in. The house was modest, a far cry from the polished home we'd shared, but it felt lived in. There were photos of Megan and Daniel on the walls, and a vase of fresh flowers sat on the table. We sat across from each other, the silence heavy. Finally, I spoke. "I've been angry for a long time, April. Angry at what you did to me, to our family. And I think I came here because I don't want to be angry anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. I continued. "I don't forgive you, not yet, maybe not ever. But I want to move on. I want to let go of this bitterness and just live my life." April wiped her eyes, nodding. "I understand. And I'm so sorry, John. For everything. I know I can't undo the pain I caused, but I'm trying to be better. For the kids, for myself. Maybe one day for you." Her words were sincere, but I didn't let them sway me. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about closure. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, standing up. "But this is the last time I want to have this conversation. I need to focus on what's ahead." April nodded, her face a mix of sorrow and understanding. "I wish you happiness, John." "Same to you," I said, and with that I left. Driving home, I felt lighter, like I'd finally put down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was peace, or the closest thing to it I'd felt in years. After my talk with April, I felt like I'd finally sealed a chapter of my life that had been hanging open for too long. It wasn't about rekindling anything or excusing what she'd done, it was about putting the past in its place. Life at home felt more settled. Daniel came by more often, helping me with little projects in the yard. Megan called to tell me her visit with April had gone better than expected. "She's different," she said. "But I still don't trust her completely." "That's okay," I replied. "Trust takes time." Meanwhile, things with Lisa were progressing naturally. We'd started going on small outings, hiking trails, dinners at quiet spots, and even a trivia night at a local pub. She brought out a side of me I thought I'd lost, the part that could laugh easily and look forward to the next day. One night, as we sat on her porch watching the stars, she asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive your ex?" I thought about it, the weight of the question feeling lighter than it used to. "I don't know. But I've stopped letting her control how I feel. That's enough for now." Lisa smiled, reaching for my hand. "That's a good start." Life started to feel steady, like I'd found my footing again. Daniel and I finished the backyard table, and he joked about starting a furniture business. Megan called more often, sharing updates about her classes and her cautious relationship with April. Lisa and I grew closer. One evening, she surprised me with tickets to a local art show. "You need more color in your life," she teased. At the show, I realized how much I enjoyed her company, not just the fun moments but the quiet ones too. For the first time, I thought, maybe this could be something more. As we walked out, she asked, "Do you ever think about the future?" I smiled. For the first time in a long while, I do. And I meant it. One weekend, Megan invited me to her campus for a family day event. "Mom's coming too," she warned, "but I'd like you both there." I hesitated, but agreed. When I arrived, April was already there, sitting stiffly under a tent. She gave me a small nod, but kept her distance. The day was surprisingly smooth. Megan took charge, steering conversations to neutral ground and ensuring we spent time as a family without tension. By the end of it, we were laughing together, something I hadn't thought possible. As April and I said goodbye, she looked at me and said softly, "Thank you for coming." It meant a lot to Megan. I nodded. It's about her, not us. Let's keep it that way. Walking back to my car, I felt hopeful, not for April and me, but for our family's future. Some bridges, I realized, didn't need to be burned completely. Weeks turned into months, and life felt lighter. Lisa and I continued to grow closer, and she became a regular presence at my home. Daniel took to her quickly, teasing her about her trivia skills. Even Megan, during a weekend visit, commented, "She's good for you, Dad." I can tell. One evening, Lisa stayed late, helping me cook dinner. As we cleaned up, she looked at me and said, "I wasn't sure you were ready for this when we met, but I'm glad you gave it a chance." "So am I said, meaning every word. It wasn't a grand moment or a dramatic declaration, but it felt like a turning point. For the first time, I wasn't just moving on, I was building something new. A year after the anniversary party that changed everything, I found myself hosting a quiet dinner at my home. Megan and Daniel were there, joking and sharing stories. Lisa sat beside me, fitting into the rhythm of our little family effortlessly. As the evening wound down, Daniel clinked his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, grinning. We all raised our glasses, the toast simple but meaningful. Later, as I stood on the porch watching the stars, Lisa joined me. "You've come a long way, John," she said softly. I smiled, taking her hand. "I think we all have." For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to embrace.
Bye.